Hello everyone, my name is Zachary as always, and today I'm talking about Rambo. Now this movie started off a whole strand of action movies, and it is such a good one. I think Rambo is so amazing, and I want to talk about it here because it does so many things well. So following Vietnam, this soldier named Rambo, he was a skilled soldier. But it's kind of based off of the real world because the time this takes place is right after Vietnam, and we all know, if you know your history, right after Vietnam, a lot of the soldiers that fought, since Vietnam was such a controversial war, a lot of the soldiers that fought in the Vietnam were disrespected, and that's exactly what happens here. Rambo is just walking down the street, and this police officer taunts him for fighting in the Vietnam War. And, it's just evil. These police officers and these people around him are just beating him up for fighting and sacrificing his life for his country. And I know this is a very controversial war and everything, but, yeah, I think it's really sad. It's based off of real events eventually, but then he gets to the police station and he's like, you know what? I'm done with this. So then he just rips through all these police officers like paper, and it's pretty cool. To be honest, there's so many cool sequences. Rambo kicks absolute ass in this movie. He beats, everybody up. He'll use, alright, so we get to see a little bit of his training that we actually saw in Vietnam, that we actually saw him do in Vietnam, that he must have done in Vietnam or whatever, later in the movie, because then he runs off into the woods, and then all of these policemen are going out there to find him. There's helicopters, there's all of this. Because, he assaulted several police officers. And he goes through this forest, and he uses his training from Vietnam here to survive. And there's this one part where he's on the side of a cliff, or he's on the side of a mountain just climbing around. And then there's this helicopter that's just like, hey, we're gonna shoot you. Cause you, well, we don't like you. Not gonna specifically tell you why, but it's kind of just implied by the time period. Anyway, so they start shooting at him, and he eventually pulls the guy out of the helicopter after it gets close enough. The helicopter crashes. He falls onto his face. The police officer falls into his face into the rocks. And then he just, gets down, walks away. Bro! And then, you may think he's just this dumb brute. But he's not. Rambo is way more than that. And you know why? Because after that, there's a sequence we'll talk about later. Because first, not a sponsor, but I want to talk more about this fourth sequence. So eventually they know, you know what, this Rambo guy maybe has more skill than we think. So they actually bring in somebody that was connected to what he fought for, basically his boss from Vietnam. And, he comes in and he's like, Rambo, hear me out. We can talk about this. But he's like, no, man. And, Rambo is such a freaking cool character. Forgot the actor's name, but, anyway, so, he does all these things, he does all these cool tricks and flips, whatever, and he eventually outsmarts all these police officers, ends up killing them all, and it's this really gritty action sequence, and you can feel the atmosphere, and it's cool how, it's these police officers are not expecting this, see, and then, but, Rambo has all this experience from Vietnam, and anyway, so, he eventually gets out of the forest, and he's in town. And, hell breaks loose here. Things are blowing up, cars are blowing up, town is thrown into chaos when Rambo is there, and stuff is exploding, it's getting crazy, and this is my most favorite part of the movie. I think it looks really cool. And then eventually, his guy that was basically his boss, from Vietnam, confronts him in, this convenience store. It's an abandoned convenience store, and he walks up to him, and Rambo, he just breaks out crying. Because, all of this trauma built up from Vietnam, and to come back and not be accepted and be kind of poor, actually, is sad for him. And he has all this emotional baggage that he's been carrying and has been showing through these violent acts of self-defense. And it's just a really sad sequence. And it shows he's not just a dumb brute. He has emotion. And this is such a nice sequence. Definitely an amazing end to this movie. So, eventually ends with him crying, really showing his emotion after being this cold, tough warrior for all this time. Seeing it's nothing more but a tool for warfare. but he's more than that. He is Rambo, and this is an amazing movie. So yeah, guys, definitely a 10 out of 10, maybe a 9.5, but I don't know, guys. In 1985, we got the movie Rambo, First Blood Part 2. This follows Rambo going to Vietnam, following the first movie. He goes back to Vietnam by the U.S. government to take pictures at this Vietnamese, camp, basically. But he finds a bunch of prisoners of war, tries to help them escape, but then it just doesn't work out, and now he gets abandoned in the Vietnamese forest, and that is basically what we're following here. And here's the thing. This movie is drastically different from the first one. This one has about double the budget that the first one had, and with this, it is a much larger movie. Instead of just being in the woods in this town, off the side of this town, going up against this police force, here he is going up against an entire army. And of course, it's bigger explosions, bigger action sequences, bigger kills, and everything. And do I think it is better? No. Because the first one, nothing's really captured what that first one did. It was such a good concept. In the time it came out in, it was basically the perfect time for it to have came out. But to say I enjoyed the second one would be an understatement. I loved this movie. I loved all the action sequences and the explosions, and the story is still magnificent in this one, obviously. Because I feel like in every Sylvester Stallone movie, or at least most of his movies, there is an underlying story, especially this movie, because it follows how the government just undervalues him, even though he is dying for this country, and all he wants is to save these people who care about his country as much as he does. He loves his country. He goes out there and fights for it. But then when he expects the government of this country he loves, expects it to come back for him, they don't. They're like, oh, nope, you have prisoners? No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that again. But so then Rambo just stays there, rescues all these people. And just the villain also in this movie is so amazing. And he has played so many amazing performances. For instance, he was the main villain in Beverly Hills Cop. He was the main villain in tons of other movies. I don't even remember, but there's probably tons of other movies he was the main villain in that I can't even remember. But yeah, it's just an amazing villain. This whole movie's great. There's this one action sequence where Rambo has this huge gun, and he just shoots down hordes of people and all these soldiers. And something else, this movie is very similar to Commando. That movie came all around the same time as this movie, and that's just kind of funny because there is a lot of resemblance between the two films. That's just kind of funny, I think. And, so he gets back to the United States with the prisoners of war, and it does have a very bittersweet ending. And I say this because it's sweet, yes, because they got back, he rescued the prisoners, but also kind of bitter because he's just like, I just want to be on my own, man. Bye. And because he just leaves. And that's where this movie ends off. So yeah, I really, really enjoy this movie. Action's bigger explosions. Everything is bigger. And yeah, so out of 100, I'm probably going to give this movie a 78, 79. 78 sounds good. 78 out of 100. So yeah, guys, a very good movie. The movie Rambo 3 came out in 1988. This movie follows, obviously, Rambo, played by Sylvester Stallone, basically just living in a small community following the second film, and he's invited back by the U.S. military to go on one more mission. After the person who led him in the military during the Vietnam War gets kidnapped, he has no choice but to go after him and attempt to rescue him. And that is basically the whole plot of the film. Now, I have some very interesting thoughts on this film, at least to me, because alright, so after the first one came out, I thought it was a very good movie. It was about an Vietnam War. It was about a Vietnam War veteran, and how a lot of them weren't treated very well following the war because of just how controversial it was. And I just loved the film and what it was about and who the character of Rambo was. But I felt like after that, it kind of lost that charm to it. I mean, yeah, the action is really cool. The second one, it was just awesome. The third one, awesome. Because, like, these movies have always had epic action. But still, I don't think they should have made any more after the first one. Just because they told the story they wanted to tell about an ex-Vietnam War soldier who after the war was not treated very well and ended up taking out his anger on all these police officers in the woods. That is such a cool idea. But then they do all these different things with the Rambo character that just, to me at least, do not give the character the same kind of flair it had in that first film. Just because of what they managed to do with them in that first one that was so clever, especially at the time, was really important. But, still, just, this movie, if you haven't seen any of the other ones, you're basically not gonna miss anything because, I mean, it's just an action movie. I mean, it's just a really good action movie. If you just take it as that and you don't compare it to the second one or the first one or any of the ones after that, this is a really good action movie, actually. Like, genuinely, like, the action in this movie is incredible in a lot of scenes. And that's something that the Rambo franchise does very well. And, yeah, so, action is just amazing here. Story, I mean, the Rambo movies didn't have a whole lot of story after the first one. Again, my main problem with why they should have made more than one. But, so yeah, guys. That is basically Rambo 3, came out in 1988. It's a really good action movie. A really good Rambo movie, though, I'm not too sure. Rambo 4 came out in 2008. Now, the early 2000s was really a time when Sylvester Stallone was coming back to revisit a lot of his older franchises. Like, 2 years earlier, he revisited the Rocky franchise with Rocky Balboa, and now, 2 years later, in 2008, he comes to revisit Rambo. And after the absolute blunder that was the third film, is the fourth film better? I'd 100% say yes. Because there's a lot of issues with it that I will get into, but overall, I think it is the closest to what I imagine a Rambo film is like. One that has a lot of themes in it, but also it represents a lot of the PTSD that Rambo feels in his mind, while also providing some awesome action sequences, which this film delivers on. This probably has the best action out of the entire franchise. I mean, there is just blood and guts everywhere. Where there is action, there is gore. The action in this movie is the thing that saves it. Because if it did not have that, and if it didn't have that, then I don't think this movie would be very good. Because I think overall, like, as a movie, it is very stiff. Because, like, the writing in this movie is absolutely abysmal. Like, there are certain sequences where characters are talking, and it just feels so robotic. It feels like they're reading lines off a sheet of paper, not actually performing those lines, but just kind of reading them. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like a table read of sorts. Like, there's times where, like, actors will all sit around the table and read their lines out in the order they're supposed to. It just feels like that. But it's not. But it's not supposed to be. They're actually, in these scenes, it just doesn't work. The writing is really bad. But still, the themes in this movie, the themes of Rambo triumphantly going to these people, this enslaved group of people that throughout the film you'll learn to hate them so much, but by the ending sequence, when Rambo is absolutely decimating them, it feels earned, and it feels earned. Because you learn to hate you learn to hate these antagonists throughout the film, but then at the actual end, when the resolution happens, it feels so earned when Rambo just goes up there and they just obliterate all of them. And again, that's what brings in the amazing action that I was talking about. And yeah, so overall, it's decent. And this is what I'd imagine a Rambo film would be like. It revisits and it handles well the PTSD of our lead character, while also providing some really great action. And yes, this movie does not always work. It even kind of revisits the same thing that the third one tried to do. This did it a lot better, where Rambo's leading another life, and then the government comes back and asks him to do a job, but then he's like, no at first, but then he later goes back and goes to do it. But, yeah, so that is basically Rambo 3. It's decent. If I went on the Letterboxd right now and gave it a review, which I'm probably gonna do right after this, I would definitely probably give this a 3 stars, 3 to 3.5. The movie Rambo Last Blood is the most recent Rambo film, and it features Sylvester Stallone playing John Rambo. Yes, he is still a badass, and he has not slowed down a whole lot, despite him being a freaking dinosaur at this point. No. Despite him being pretty old. And, well, the action is really good. They also try to mix in a story that builds on top of the action. Because this late into the series, it would just be kind of old to have him return to war, like all the other sequels post the first Rambo, post First Blood. It would just be kind of lame to see him go back to war, so they had to do something else with the character. So they introduced this niece, which would mean that Rambo would have to have a brother, which I honestly don't believe. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because we've never heard about him previously. We've never heard about this character previously. Yet she's old enough to have been a baby by the time the last Rambo film came out, which would have been like the early 2000s. But still, I mean, yes, it does not make a whole lot of sense, but that is just the basis of where the action comes in. And when there is action, it is awesome. I don't think it's to the scale of what they did with the last film back in the early 2000s, because, like, that ending sequence with all that action and all the blood and guts spewing everywhere is crazy. And we still have that in this one. I just think it's slightly dialed back just a little bit. And overall, do I think this is a great movie? No. Do I think it is overhated? Absolutely. I mean, we still get some really cool sequences, and surprisingly, some emotional sequences, which we don't get very often in the Rambo movies post the first one, or even the second one. Because after that, there wasn't a lot more to do with the character, so they just did non-stop action to fill up that void that the story and that the psychological damage of John Rambo, they filled it up with action. But here in this one, they actually try to put in a story and some information about John Rambo and kind of how he's holding up. Because at this point, there is no more John Rambo. I mean, his niece, which he's like a father figure to, like, when she's gone, when she's kidnapped, if she dies, he is, like, gone. He's this full-on killing machine, and he does everything to get her back. And we try to get a mix of some emotional beats in there, but, you know, it's kind of difficult when you've never met this character before, so it doesn't feel as natural, if that makes sense. But now I kind of want to talk about the ending, because it is like it's kind of goofy, awesome, the action's really cool. And it is basically Home Alone if it was John Rambo, because basically Rambo has all these traps set throughout his property, throughout his house and everything. And it basically turns into Home Alone, but it's John Rambo kind of running around giving one-liners about how you'll never leave this place alive, and then proceeds to absolutely rip them apart. I mean, that's just the end of the movie. I mean, it's pretty cool. You got to admit that.
hey, even the people that gave it like 2.5 stars on Letterboxd were able to admit that last sequence was kind of cool. I mean, it was kind of cool. Now, honestly, I don't think this was a necessary sequel, but hey, I mean, it was something. It was definitely something. It was overhated, yeah. And, yeah, that about sums up my thoughts. If you guys enjoyed this video or any of my other content, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.